say some things.
Hello. Adventure.
Love.
Connection.
Risk.
Passion.
Evolution.
Play.
Life. The Archetypal Tarot Podcast. Provocative mythology for the 21st century.
What archetypal patterns do we all have within us that can help us through this pandemic? I'm Julienne Javot, an archetypal consultant, and together with my co-host, Story Through Stone founder and teacher, Sandera Quackenbush, we discuss 2 of the 4 core survival archetypes. And well, you might be surprised to find out which those are. And we also welcome our new sponsor midway through the show, and we'll tell you about a special offer just for our listeners. And on to the show. Hello, Sandera. How are you?
Hello, dear Julienne. I am riding the waves of this new world.
Yeah, it's like that. We have gotten some requests. So I was like, this next episode, what are we going to talk about? You know, we've covered death, rebirth, the world, all of that. We've gotten some requests from our listeners that they'd like to hear a little bit more specifically about archetypes. And I realized that while every conversation in the podcast we've had has included archetypes, we haven't really talked about the specific archetypes in terms of the work that I do with people and have done with people. The personality archetypes, those like parts of the psyche, patterns in the psyche that we refer to as archetypes, and how those are playing out right now with the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic is huge. And I think really can be useful, actual tools for people to use, to work with, to observe themselves, to get grounded, because we're in the middle of, the world's turned upside down, right? The anxiety, and there's so much happening that there are 4 archetypes and really a corollary of 4 plus 4 kind of relationships they have with other archetypes that can be super helpful, especially right now. And so I thought it would be good to, in order to kind of do them justice and really give people, stuff to work with, I'm going to talk about 4, but we're really going to go in depth with just 2 of them. And those are the 2 that I think are probably the most prevalent right now. So this is part 1 of a 2-part series. And these archetypes are frequently called survival archetypes.
Oh, and just before you go into it, Julienne, some of our newer listeners might be interested to hear that your knowledge of the archetypes and my love of the tarot is originally what brought us together for this podcast.
Oh, yeah.
I was intrigued and inspired by the archetypes of the tarot, and you were a practicing archetypist, archetypal consultant. And I said, hey, wouldn't it be fun if we sat down and just, went through the tarot and discussed the archetypes of the tarot? And you were full on and 10 steps ahead of me after that idea came into bloom. So here we are more than 8 years later, and we couldn't be luckier to have you on this podcast again to discuss the archetypes. And as I understand it, there are these 4 survival archetypes that you're going to discuss in the 2-part series. So I'm very excited to be sitting here with you again to hear all about those. Could you just give us a nutshell description of what those 4, what are, basically are the survival archetypes, and just in a nutshell, what they are?
Sure. And actually before that, the way I define archetypes in the way of the kind of personality, the archetypes within the psyche that are more about the individual person and their relationships versus like life and death and rebirth are archetypes of the world of situations, right? These are a little bit more related to our personality, the deeper parts of patterns in our psyche. And so archetypes, the way I define them, are universal patterns of talents, motivations, and behaviors. And each of them contain a dialogue of how, and indeed sometimes why, we use our energy, our creativity, our lives the way we do. They're a really, I think, valuable way to learn kind of like the deeper truth about ourselves and what possibilities and what kind of potential roadblocks can be contained in each of these archetypal patterns. And I was trained with Carolyn Mace originally. She wrote a book called Sacred Contracts, basically about archetypes in relationship to a soul contract. And then further studies, obviously most of archetypal work goes back to Plato, and then Carl Jung, and then many other people have worked with these kinds of archetypes. So it's a vast field of study that I just want to note that in the last 6 or 8 months, there was a little bit of a dip. Like people weren't really talking about archetypes for, I'd say, maybe 7 years, 5-7 years. It was sort of like out of fashion. Like the word and the kind of modality of archetypes seem to kind of go back underground. Certainly archetypes are always alive, but the talk of them in that kind of specificity was sort of at an ebb, and I've seen it move back. I've heard a good number of people talk specifically about archetypes, and more recently about what these survival archetypes are like. And that something that is really, archetypes are rich. Like there's this pattern, like this container that contains all of these reactions and behaviors, and then you've got usually an outside effect or something that happens. These archetypes will sort of turn themselves on and react, right? And so the survival ones, the reason they're called that is they are the 4 core archetypes we use for survival when we face a threat or when we feel like maybe something's not going right. It's one or all 4 of these that will be kind of at the fore. Those are the first 4. They're core to everybody. And I've never met anybody who didn't really work with all 4 of these at one time or another. And the 4 are, I know. Hey, stop it. Okay.
Come on, they've been underground so long. I want them to break up and start talking. Let's go.
We're living all of these every day, especially in this time when we're afraid, when the world is changing. So we'll start with a first one, which is the first archetype ever. It's the child. We were all children, no matter what. Nobody was raised in a test tube. Everybody has the child archetype. Within that, there are flavors or types of child. So some people have had their experience in their actual childhood and then into adulthood could have potentially had a specific type, like the puer eternus or the eternal child, the Peter Pan, right? It's still the child archetype, but it has a really, really kind of specific type to it. I'm not going to go into the individual types today of the child. My website, Archetypist, will get you a bunch of information on that. But what's super important to know using the child is that each archetype has it's frequently called the shadow and light. I like using the language of empowered and disempowered, right? So when you're facing a threat, like as a child, to put it in context of what's happening now, the world is changing. People are dying. There's a virus. Like that's, you're scared, right? So what do? You look to an adult, as most children look to an adult to say, okay, somebody tell me what's going on. Somebody tell me it's going to be okay. That is the child reaction part of all of us. It can be within us as adults. Maybe it's not, like a child throwing a temper tantrum, but trust me, adults can have temper tantrums too, frequently on social media. So,
yeah, I wonder who you could be talking about. I have no idea.
So it's important to really understand, as we recognize, it might be easy for a lot of people to recognize the child as it comes out. I definitely find myself looking more at comfort foods, that will comfort me. That's the child part of me that's like, I don't know what's going on. I just need comfort. And maybe a parent figure had comforted us with food. So it's really important to recognize that it's important to see these patterns at play as a pattern. They are both us. They are a part of us and not us. We are far, far more than just a set of archetypes. But the key, I think, is the being able to recognize and have compassion, because each of these archetypes will probably come up when we're threatened, when there's a survival issue happening. And the child can be, in a dangerous way. You can give up your power to other people because you're scared and you expect them to think of you as their number one priority, when maybe they just want to have power and want people to follow them, right? So there's a dangerous part of the child where they're giving up their power, but there's also something that's really helpful about the child archetype in us that helps us use our imaginations to help us soothe ourselves by playing, by making a space to play. And I know that you and I had talked about kind of how you can see the child how that archetype can help us in this crisis. Like, what does it look like to be an adult with a happy inner child? How can you foster that? And what does that look like?
Yeah, it's amazing to go outside and see more adults and their kids outside playing, adults on their own playing. I just come out, when I go on my daily walks, I'm just seeing more and more of that kind of out in the open, because people have been confined indoors and their usual activities restricted. And one way to just thoroughly deepen into this time and work through this time, actually, ironically, is through play. And so you might find, wildflowers picked and put in a pattern on the beach, or someone's collaborated on a whole little hand-built memorial down at the end of the beach here for loved ones who have passed. It's just an amazing time for that healing child to come out and play through this period of time.
I love that. And it's a really important thing, I think, for everyone, adults who are walking through the world, to know that we have this part in us, and that, there are potentialities and pathologies to every archetype. And again, that kind of comes back to that shadow and light, empowered, disempowered. And there's something really beautiful about the child archetype as adults, and I'll get into that kind of as its corollary archetype to the child, that that's a part of us that can really connect with nature. It can be really curious and have an open mind that can seek wisdom. So like there's something about the child that just wants an easy answer, just wants to click onto a news or an article or a YouTube video that will just give us all the answers. Like, just tell me, I'm anxious. Someone needs to tell me what's going on. That's a kind of disempowered child. But at the same time, the empowered child can be curious and can be open, and they find the trustworthy adults to help them get an understanding. And I see that really kind of playing out a lot, where people are in panic, right? They're like fight or flight. They're like, they'll believe anything that anybody tells them that makes them feel better. And that's unfortunate, because it can be dangerous. You can also see part of the child going, I'm not going to wear a mask. You can't tell me what to do. That's the child archetype. Meanwhile, the growing body of evidence is that you should wear a mask to protect yourself and protect other people. So the child archetype is what we've got going on. That's got its kind of difficulties as well as its empowerment. So the child can be curious. The corollary that I work with is the sovereign, or the king or queen. So they're separate archetypes, but they are related. It's as if one is kind of an outcropping of the other. So, as a child grows up, they become more and more responsible. And sovereign is, having responsibility, or able to not only take care of yourself, grow in wisdom and be responsible, and your sphere of care and concern and responsibility grows. So the sovereign is that king or queen, the adult part of us, the adult in the room that can say, this is a big deal. We are in the middle of a crisis. The wisdom to seek out truth in places that are reputable, where there isn't where they're not seeking to make people panic, but they're seeking to have wisdom and actual scientific information. So there's that part of us that can go, oh, I really want to believe that post that someone just put on Facebook that just tells me the simple answer is this. But there's a part of me going, is that really true? I'm the adult. How reputable is this source? So much can kind of come from that. And the adult says, okay, physical distancing, and the scientists, doctors are telling us this is a good idea. Wearing a mask, it's a really good idea. The adult says, I'm responsible for myself and I'm responsible. I don't want to get anyone sick. And it might be uncomfortable, but I can wear a mask when I'm around other people. So we see those as kind of two examples of how it's playing out. And the child can help us stay curious without seeking an absolute. I think everyone wants an absolute answer. The reality is it's complex and it's messy, and we have to get through this.
Yeah, I think having the right sovereign archetypes in place allows for the child to explore and play more safely. So, where is a special place in nature that you can find where it's not going to be overcrowded? You can take your mask off. You can deepen into that space. That is a safe place for the child to open up and explore. And if that sovereign is overseeing things for you in a responsible way, then you can really deepen in both places.
Yeah, exactly. And I am in the show notes. I'm going to expand on each of these and kind of look at what some of the empowered attributes are, what the disempowered, or where you're handing your power away, and then throw in what I call attendant archetypes. Other patterns that might be within us that we can work with that can be helpful, that are related to it. The 4 core survival archetypes, to me, they're like the 4 family of which every archetype, there's a DNA, which each one came from. So the child then spurs the sovereign. And it goes that way because the child archetype's the first one. First one, when we're born, we have to go through childhood in one form or another. Some people have a shortened childhood. Some people have really long childhoods, so I will make some, a little bit more notes so people can use it. And it's, I think, really important to work with these patterns, to pay attention to them, to have compassion. If you find yourself resistant to any of these patterns, have some compassion. I think that is a key. And that's something that I picked up many years after I graduated from the program in archetypal consulting, that if you run across shadow material and you resist it and you're like, oh, no, that's not me. No. That's usually a sign that there's something true that we're not ready to work with. But compassion with the feelings related to that and the possibility that might be what we're doing can be that piece that opens it up. And towards the end of the show, I'll talk a little bit about sort of an acronym that you can use with each of these archetypes to really, really work with them. Because I think right now we all really, really need a way to navigate and to interact positively with what's happening in order to kind of get to what we've been talking about in the last couple podcasts, which is, what do we want the world to look like? What are the opportunities that will only exist now that will help us, guide us towards something better? So
maybe a good halfway point. We're at a good halfway.
Yeah. And so before we go on and get to the next archetype, we're going to take a little break and hear something about our new sponsor. Hey, Sindera. So I got to find out, how did it go? We have a new sponsor, Keen, and I heard that you recently got our reading.
That's right. I hear you rubbing your hands together.
I'm rubbing my hands together. You can hear that? Oh my God.
Yes, I did have my first ever reading from Keen, and I selected the tarot card reader Ruby Moon, who specializes in fast, accurate, and brilliant predictions. And so, for so long we've done an archetypal tarot podcast really focusing on metaphors and archetypes and the non-woo-woo. So this was a big leap for me to try out a psychic website. So I had butterflies in my stomach. I was really excited. I think there's something really special about calling a number and you don't know what's going to happen. You're going to ask a very deep and personal question. And so I was able to speak with Ruby Moon. And she was a very, very sweet and kind person. She was right on top of the question that I asked. I asked my question, which was basically, what is awakening for me during this period of time and what might be blocking me? And she was
Good question.
saying, okay, the answer is coming. She's pulling the cards, and she pulled for me the Wheel of Fortune. And that really matched kind of definitely the ups and downs and sense of destiny that I've been encountering with my long-term projects. She's very, very positive. She says, I'm going to come out of this virus like a rose, she said, which is, I hope is true.
Like a rose? Like
she
a
said,
flower?
I'm going to come out of this virus period like a rose. And,
Rose.
and, roses are quite special. They're as a Gemini, that's my month, that's my flower. That resonated with me, and it made me, I'm hoping it's true, but at the very least, it makes me feel, comforted on a deep level that I'll be okay during this period of time. She said that September and October will be great months for me. So that's a bit down the way. We will see. We will see what happens. But she was just, kept pulling cards and had very positive things to say, that I'll be making more money, maybe going on a healing trip. Someone will enter my life to help me. And we started talking a little more about my work with stones. And she actually offered some a very practical approach with stones, or practical in the world of intuitives, I suppose, which is a way to test if a stone is helpful to you or not by placing it on your forehead. And when you do so, maybe you might lean forward or you might lean back. And if you lean forward, it's a stone that is good for you. So that was something kind of like actual that I could maybe try with my own work with stones, which I'm excited to do that. And so she also pulled the Chariot for me in this movement into fall, because I was asking her, I also work at a school, and all the changes that are happening and adaptations we'll have to make with the coronavirus, and it's pretty intense. So I was asking her for more specificity, and you're saying September and October are going to be great months, but I work at a school, and the fall is it could be pretty intense. She did acknowledge that there is big change and challenges, but that the Chariot is going to help me persevere through the fall. And she just
said, lots of major arcana cards.
I really did. She did pull those for me, which is always, notable when you're getting the major arcana cards. She also noted that there's just a ton of generosity around me, and I resonated with that because I work for an amazing school with incredible administrators and staff and teachers and children and families that have really come together very closely through this pandemic. And so I really feel lucky and supported in this community that I'm a part of. So she was able to see into that. And, we just talked a little bit more about our astrological signs, and the reading went by so fast. I spent about 10 minutes with her, and it just went really, really quick. But seeing into your life in that sort of way, there's a sense of vulnerability and beauty that comes forward from that experience. So I can imagine a lot of people who, are in a state of quite a bit of unknown, could benefit quite a bit from this level of positivity and comfort from a reading such as this. So I would have to circle back and let you know if her actual predictions are true. I'm not a big person on predictions, but
Yeah, we got there's a lot of changes. There's a lot of corners that we can turn down and stuff like that. But it sounds like you had an overall pretty positive experience.
That's right. And, I think if what you're looking for is comfort and affirmation in the present, at the very least, that there can be a lot provided in these.
Cool. Thanks so much, Sandera.
Mm-hmm.
And before we get back to the rest of the show, y'all need to know that you can get your first 5-minute reading for only $5, but you only get it by visiting trykeen.com/archetypal. Check it out. So the next survival/core archetype is the victim. I think everybody can identify. We're all a victim of what's happening. Literally. We all are being impacted. The threat, the things that are happening to us, and everyone's got, from economic to losing a loved one, to becoming sick, to being afraid of being sick, to literally everything around us is the victim archetype writ large. And we can't help but through this life be wounded. And wounds in relationship with the victim are huge. The differences are the understanding of the victim that we are being hurt and we have been hurt. How do we work with that? How do we, again, the bridge here is compassion, to have an understanding that this is difficult. And a huge part of the victim to me is accepting what's going on, which can feel like weakness, but acceptance to the vulnerability that we're in is actually laying the foundation for being grounded and being actually to be able to make real decisions that aren't simply based on fear. They're based on wisdom and based on discernment. And it's a difficult one, but we're all doing it right. We all want to blame someone or something for what's happening. Maybe it's in a small way or it's in a big way. I think you see politically blame-o-rama, and sometimes it's true. Some, things could have been done better, but if you stay in the disempowered part, the pathological, that's all you're ever going to get. There will be an embitterment, and everybody else is at fault. We'll never be able to really kind of stand on our own ground and understand and heal, right? So the victim's path can be staying wounded, or it can be understanding, acceptance, and seeking of healing. And with that process, we bring in what I call the corollary for the victim is the warrior, right? Mm-hmm. So the warrior is a separate archetype. And again, it's like the sovereign, they're separate, but they are intimately related to each other in and of themselves. And if you think of what possibly could be good about the victim, many people have asked me that. Well, there's the victorious part of us that is healed, that has become stronger through that. Whatever the initiating wound was, the victim feeling, they worked through it, they learned, they encompassed what happened, and on the outside of that, they are the victorious. They are that part that is, I have grown stronger. And with that, they can, on the empowered side of that is the victorious can realize that the suffering that they went through themselves connects them to absolutely every other person in this world. And that's incredibly powerful. And you can't get to that connection through vulnerability without the vulnerability and the wound itself. So it's huge. It's incredibly powerful. I also bring in the separate archetype of the warrior, intimately related, because the warrior is not simply about fighting, but about understanding, recognizing, and setting boundaries. Like, I was hurt before, here's my boundary. Not going to do that again. This is the wisdom of the warrior, is the setting the boundaries, knowing when to fight and knowing when to just go, no, here's the boundary. This is not going to happen again. To be both have the defense and when needed, to go on the offense, to move forward through something, to go, this isn't happening again. The warrior also has a truth-seeking part of it and needs to find the truth. And that will relate to the next two big archetypes that we're going to talk about in the next podcast. But having that understanding of where you are with a victim. Do you just feel like your power is gone? You have no choices. You're absolutely powerless. That is kind of the deepest part of the disempowered victim. And again, the recognition of, what's going on here, being a little bit curious, having some compassion for what's going on within you to process it through and then navigate to the what is next. Because you stay in the victim frequently with the people who just complain all the time. Everything happened to them. It's everybody else's fault. That's victim 101. And they're not happy, and they don't spread joy. And some people who are so stuck in their victim no one can really help them because they've concretized and they've solidified into that identity. I will guarantee you somebody is stuck in their victim, they're not processing their emotions and they're not having compassion. They can frequently become vampires because they've been so hurt that they will just take in everything they can from all the attention and all of, whatever they can get, that kind of black hole of need in that. And that's something that they are missing for themselves is self-compassion and recognition of what's, even accepting what's going on. So huge for all of us right now.
Yeah. And on a collective level, the victim warrior is showing up, in all the places in our society where there has been inequity, has been ultra highlighted through this crisis, right? And probably people who before would have never had felt that they would be going to unemployment and needing to file are finding themselves in that role. And it, seeing this archetype come up must be a big struggle. And also speaking of the victim and the warrior energy that comes up in response to that, Ahmaud Arbery's death
Yes.
and murder has really brought that into the highlight of the media right now. And so it's bringing up those voices at this time.
Absolutely. And I think what you're mentioning is the word victim itself it's a trigger word for a lot of people. And I'm coming from the archetypal, right? So we're all victims. Communities are victims, right? That doesn't mean that they are 100% empowered. What I bring to the understanding of the archetypal pattern is that nuanced, it's a container of both pathology and possibility. So when I talk about the victim archetype, it's not to denigrate. It is to show, here's the possibility, right? The pathology is the word itself means basically the path of sorrow. And then possibility, what can come through that. Again, I look at the victim and the victorious as both being aspects of the same pattern. And the victorious is that understanding through the pain that a community and the person goes through, that they recognize, oh my gosh, this is happening to other human beings. The compassion, the action that should come from that compassion to say never again, this is terrible. What actions and what connectivities in community can we engage in that will help prevent this from happening again, from the awareness being there. And so it is a really nuanced conversation. And the archetype itself is so powerful, but people do tend to think of it simply as, a victim has absolutely no power. And, what I'm talking about is that's not true. We can all be victims. There's opportunities within each of them, and to recognize, oh my gosh, heartbreaking to see one last loss of life after another in the Black community and in people of color. it is, again, it's heartbreaking, right? So the compassion comes in there for the self who feels it, and then the compassion for the people going through it. Migrant children just being popped on planes and sent back to whatever country. Ugh. There's so much. So a nuanced understanding of the victim, I think, can be really, really helpful. And that's what I want to kind of go into next, because you brought that up. I've looked at it mainly in terms of how we work with ourselves, or maybe we work in relationship with another person, but it can be something that can be expanded to societal levels. The personal work we have control of, but once we do our work, we're better able to do the work for communities and all the people that we're connected to. So when I was working one-on-one with people in a consultant counselor role, frequently these archetypes they presented difficulty. The first blush of them is frequently got a lot of shadow material. And so I took what Tara Brach, who's a meditation teacher, author, amazing woman. She has an acronym, RAIN, RAIN, that she would use with people when she's working with them. She's also a psychotherapist, a therapist. So I took that archetype, RAIN, and kind of borrowed from it and repurposed a little bit of it to work with each of these archetypes. So you spot that part of the child that feels like, you need comfort, you're threatened, or the child or the victim, it's like, oh, I lost my job, or whatever intervening thing is happening with you. And I'll put it in the show notes. So RAIN, what does it stand for? One is recognition. So we're bringing awareness, having some curiosity to recognize, oh, I see this pattern coming up in me. It's simply that. It's not doing a lot with it, but having the openness to recognize, could this be, I feel like a victim with this. I lost my job. I don't feel good about it, or whatever. So R is for recognize. The A stands for acceptance. I add on to that compassion. So you accept, like, fuck, this is what's happening. And I know we've talked about this in previous, just you gotta go, okay, this is where we are. If you are in denial about it, you won't be able to move because you're not on the ground anymore. You are in panic mode trying to get you out of it. So recognition, acceptance, and accepting it with compassion, I find to be the most powerful. Difficult. I'm just going to say it's difficult. Even to this day, when I've had a self-compassion practice for 7, 8 years, I still don't want to do it because that means I have to feel. When I have that compassion, I'm accepting what's going on, and I have to feel it. Ugh, not fun. But once you're through it, it is opening the doors wide, because our psyche wants to push down all of the scary stuff and uncomfortable things, grief, loss. Grief and loss are kicking our asses right now. But if we're not able to feel it, it's going to well up and sit somewhere and be really, really uncomfortable. So that A in RAIN is for acceptance, and I added acceptance with compassion. So
that addition, that's nice.
Yeah, it kind of has to go with that. I don't think we can accept things sometimes if we don't have compassion with it. Some things are really, really hard to accept. And this is a practice. Again, the RAIN, give it a shot. It will be easy for some things and difficult for others. But I think really, really helpful to work with these patterns. You don't just want to spot a pattern and go, oh, that's what that is. Okay, that's nice. But in order to work with them and see, they're purposeful, is to actually work with them. So the next is R. So we've got R for recognize, A for accept with compassion, investigate, look into, be curious. We're going to go back to the curiosity and investigate. What can we do? What is possible for us to work with, given that this pattern, what is the possibility it's bringing to us? Maybe it's just a possibility. Maybe we just needed to accept. You don't need the I for investigate, but it's there. With the next N is navigate. Maybe you don't need to navigate. Like maybe it will help you make another decision to maybe open that resume file up, if you've been laid off, maybe it's leading you to do that. Or if it's just something that was really, really difficult, maybe you just detach from it. So N also stands for non-attachment. If you just go, oh, that came up, that was really difficult, and you just have to let it go. You felt it, you've accepted it, you've let it maybe guide you, if there was guidance through it. And again, it's going to be situational. Sometimes that archetype is really urging you to go do something, or it's just urging you to feel it and let it go. So RAIN, recognize, accept with compassion, investigate, and navigate. And I add the non-attachment or non-attach to the end. So there's like two ends. Just maybe your navigation leads you to go, gotta let that one go. Gotta rest. Gotta do whatever it is, the guidance that came out through those others. So two huge archetypes that I think can be helpful guides for us to interact more positively within ourselves and see what's happening in the community,
Yeah, absolutely. And I would like to just highlight that we've entered into the time of Gemini. So your talk about curiosity today has kind of sparked me as a Gemini sort of word to be one of the components that helps us through this period. And I kind of see the Gemini as those twin childs that we've been exploring through these archetypes. And for me, the three that have really come up through Mace's work anyway is the wounded child, the magical child, and the child of nature. We discussed a little bit about the child being able to play, but the magical child is able to see the potential for sacred beauty in all things. And we've all seen the value of play. We all see the value of these things, of embracing the empowered child, but you need time to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And
permission, right? You have to give yourself permission to play as an adult,
right.
It seems.
I think we've known these things intellectually for some time. It's always in the back of our head, but I think now is a period where it's actually being explored and embodied. And we had mentioned in a previous podcast about the woundedness during this period of time. We had mentioned the Michael Meade quote that next to our wounds are our deepest gifts, and the wounded child can bring us there. And when we're not presented with the same structures and obstacles we may have had in our daily lives before, we are brought back to kind of some of our childhood wounds and, working through some things that may have been under the surface for a very, very long time. Yeah. And to wrap that up is the child in nature, which, people getting out and really being in nature is just open up. I feel myself, I just can feel actually the rhythms of the moon so much more, waxing or waning, new or full. I've never planted anything in my life, but I planted some little wildflower seeds that I found and a sunflower seed from a friend that has miraculously sprouted up under my not so green thumb. And it's just an amazing connection to the larger world and the natural world than I've ever had before. And I think a lot of people are experiencing that as well. And these are incredible empowered medicines of these archetypes that I would love to hear how our listeners are engaging with.
Absolutely. And for me, I feel like we've just barely touched the top part of the surface of these archetypes. They're incredibly rich, but really, really important. And I know, that the child especially, there's the adult part of us can be really frustrated with trying to lead the grown-up life, mortgages, children of your own, all the things you need to do, and then the responsibility that you might feel for your community, the heartbreak for the community, that it can feel anathema or silly to talk about the child archetype. But when we're talking about having enough psychic space to take all of those things, those grown up, the sovereign world on, the child can be an inroad to create that space through play. And you have to give permission, or if you've got a good friend who, I have some friends, and you're one of them that do this, who just kind of naturally give me permission to play. Because they're, maybe I just see them as an adult or whatever. You have permission to play. And it's something that's happened in this last week. I have 2 groups of friends who we do a Zoom meeting since all this started. We do a Zoom party or whatever once a week. And this just happened to be one on Tuesday. And there were only 3 of us on it. But I just was like, we need to dance. Okay, people, I was like, guys, I'm turning on I got my Spotify up. I DJ'd a whole dance set and was just like, guys, I need to dance right now if you guys want to dance with me. It was so much fun. It was a blast of everybody dancing. I was in my room. They were each in their kitchen. And, other people in their homes were coming up and going, what's going on? And then it turned into a mini dance party. So that is the joy of the child. I didn't intend it. Yeah. I didn't sit there and think, here's what we're going to do. It was more like, fuck, I need to do this. Like, I'm just doing this now. I just have to, and I wasn't even drinking. I had I was drinking mango passion fruit juice. Maybe it was the sugar, right? The sugar in the job. But that, I didn't realize after that, the effects of that are still with me. And I am taking on, I have a huge amount of stuff happening in my life that is just rope a dope of grief. I have friends who are sick. I have, just fuck, it was horrible. But that one thing, so I just want to share that with our audience, that you might just look for those opportunities. And if your intuition goes, yeah, I want a dance party, or input, whatever it is, the fun thing, fucking do it. Because that is creating the space for the other parts of us to live and coexist. And those decisions that you need to make almost miraculously become easier to deal with because the space is opened up. You know what I mean? So child super important, victims important. And to bury the headline, there's 2 more that we'll talk about in the next. And that is the saboteur with its corollary, the magician, and the prostitute, and its corollary, the lover. So we will talk about that in part 2.
I can't wait.
I know, those are fun ones too, but I thought the first is first. These are the ones easiest to see.
First.
Exactly.
Right. Well, I hope everyone can play and dance like no one is watching, enjoy their summers in safe and magical ways. And I really have enjoyed reconvening on this podcast with you, Julianne.
Yeah, likewise. It's like the good old days. So I hope this finds everyone doing well as can be, staying safe. And if you haven't yet, consider a little bit of self-compassion. You can just Google self-compassion, and there's a lot of great exercises. It's going to necessitate you feeling the feels. It's called for right now because I think it's going to help create the larger space to work with everything that's being thrown at us right now. And so yeah, that's my recommendation. I love everybody, and I send so much aloha.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for listening. We know that you could have done something else with the last, 45-ish minutes of your life, but we're glad that you spent it with us. And check out our show notes for links and resources. And as always, you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram at Tarot Podcast. And big thanks, as ever, to our patrons, Kat, Richard, Juniper, Peter, and Rash of Stay Woke Tarot. We appreciate your friendship and your support. And thanks to our new sponsor, Keen. Get your first 5-minute reading for $5 by visiting trykeen.com/archetypal. This podcast is produced by Both And Media, and the theme music is by The Lunar Group. Until next time, aloha.